guys, in this video today we're going to try to expand a little bit more on the application that we built on our ECS cluster. So what I actually did is I actually deleted my service because I'm going to be upgrading a few things to it. So if you don't know how to delete it, what you do is you would have your service here. You'd want to reduce your task number. There should be active tasks. You'd stop it. You change the services, the task to 0 so it doesn't rerun, and then you can delete it. So I just have it removed because I'll be adding a few things to this, and then we'll redeploy it with these new features. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set up logging. So it's something that's really important when you're building applications, any type of applications, but also for BusinessWorks Container Edition applications, to make sure that you know what's actually going on. And it also helps greatly with troubleshooting. So let's say if your application doesn't deploy correctly or something's wrong later on, you want to have those logs saved and stored so that you can go back and look and see, okay, what's actually happening. So in order to do that, we were going to leverage CloudWatch. That's a service built within AWS as well. And if you go to the CloudWatch service, this is the homepage. So you may have some alarms. I have some set for a couple of other EC2 instances I have. But what we'll be looking at are the different logs. And if you notice here, I have a few logs that already exist. So I could use these, or I can create a new one. So I just say create log group, and I just give it a name. So I'm going to do ECS BWC logs, and I'm going to create the log group, and it'll have it created. So if you notice, there's nothing, just because nothing's running. It hasn't been created. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use this log group, and I'm going to set it up on my task definition on my ECS tasks. So if I go back to my ECS homepage, go to task definitions, and then if I click on my the one that I created, which is AWS test. So if I just click on it and say create new revision, what's going to happen is that it's going to create a new task definition that I can use when deploying my service onto my ECS cluster. So create new revision. I'm just going to click on the actual container, so AWS test. And what I'm going to do is if I scroll down, I'm going to add logging configuration. So you'll see these, if you click on log driver, you have to select what drivers you want to use. So depending on, let's say, what type of logging services you might be using, this might be different. But in this case, we're going to be using CloudWatch. So we're going to use AWS logs. And so what we need to do is actually create a logging service, essentially in CloudWatch, in order to use for our application. So if I go to CloudWatch, this is the homepage when you actually have, when you use the CloudWatch service. You may see some alarms if you have them set up. In this case, I do, but we don't really care about that right now. What we go down to is logs. And in this case, I have a few logging groups that I already created, but I'm going to create a new one. So if I do create log group, and I'm going to do ECS BWCE logs, create a new log group, and that will create a log group that I can use for my actual application. So what's going to happen is that once I deploy this application or this service onto my cluster, I'm going to attach it to this log group, and it's going to provide me information about my application. So it'll be accessible there, and then also they'll be stored there. So later on, if I have to go back and review any logs, I can do that as well. So if I go back to my task definition, and here under AWS log group, this is the name of the log group. So ECS BWCE logs. Let me just make sure it's right. Yeah. And then here is the region that the logs are actually stored in. So in this case, I have it on North Virginia, which is US East 1. But depending on where you decide to put it, you can have it in a different region. You just have to make sure that it matches that region here. And I'm just going to say update, create. And so what's going to happen is now it's created a new revision or new version of the task definition AWS test. So if you notice now it says 2 next to it. So we'll be using this when we're actually deploying it onto our clusters. So if you go to clusters, click on our cluster, under services, hit create. And we're going to select our AWS test. Yes, this one we just made. Cluster's fine. Service name can be whatever you want, but I'm just going to do AWS test. Number of tasks, we're just going to have 1 task for now. Task placement, we'll leave it the same. ELB, once again, if you want to have this accessible like we did in the last video, I'm just going to add these things really quickly. If you don't remember how to do this, just check out the previous video. And auto scaling, so we're gonna change this afterwards, but for now we're just gonna test the logging to make sure it works. Hit create service, and it's going to create the service for you. So once the service is up and running on our cluster, we should be able to go to CloudWatch under that log group that we created and actually view the logs that are available. So we have to wait for the task that says pending. So we'll just give it a few minutes and we get back once it's ready to go. So now it says that our task is running, which means that we should have gotten some logs within our log stream or our log group. So if we go back to the CloudWatch management console and we actually click on the log group we created, we'll see now that there's actually a log stream and it just happened. So if we click on this, we'll see that the logs from our actual container are being streamed and essentially just being pushed onto CloudWatch or our log group. So what's really useful about this is, let's say you have an error, let's say your application isn't successful or something, you need to check something out. Logging is a very quick and easy way and cheap way to make sure that you can actually have visibility in what's actually going on within your container. And this is true for any type of container deployment, whatever language you use, but especially true also for BusinessWorks Container Edition. So in this case, I have started. So the application is up and running. It should be good to go and test. So what I'm going to do now is a couple other features. So I'm going to now add auto scaling and load balancing on the actual application itself. So these few other things. First thing I'm going to do is if I go back to EC2. So we'll go down to auto scaling, and under auto scaling, you can view the launch configuration auto scaling groups. So if I go to auto scaling groups, we'll see that this is the default auto scaling group that was created by our CloudFormation script when we actually started up and created our ECS cluster. So here you can actually edit this. So if you go to action edit, what I can do is if I want, let's say, let me change this max to 4, and then if I desire 3 EC2 instances, I can just have it scale manually as well. And if I just hit save, what's going to happen is that right here, it's going to say there's something needs to be done, because right now I desire 2. Right now I desire 3. There's 2. So what's going to happen is that it's going to spin up another EC2 instance after a little while. So we'll have to wait for that. But let's say you want to add some sort of scaling policy. So if you don't want to manually do the scaling, if you want to set it up where, dependent on some sort of factor, you want the scaling to increase or decrease, you can add a policy. So if you click on add policy, you can provide it a name, or you can also create a simple policy as well. But what you do is if I just do BWCE policy, you just can give it any name you want, and then average CPU utilization. So if the EC2 instance has an average CPU utilization of some sort of value, doesn't matter what I'm going to say, then it's going to scale another group. And then if it has less than it, then it will drop it down to whatever the desired value is. So in this case, if my desired value is 3, and I all of a sudden get a CPU spike on all 3 of them to 50% usage, it'll jump to 4. And then once on those 4, if it drops to less than 30%, then it'll drop out down to the desired 3. So it's just a matter of keeping in check of how you're actually managing your resources, your infrastructure, your platform, making sure that your costs aren't that much as well. So if I wanted to add that, I could add that as well. Just hit create, and then now you have a policy that's available within that auto scaling group as well. So let me refresh this and see if this changed. So now notice how the instance number has changed from 2 to 3. So now we probably have an instance up and running. If I go here, instances, you'll see that here is my 3rd instance host. And you'll notice that it's still trying to pass its status checks, but it's running. So once its other status checks have passed, then it'll be available to receive traffic. So that's how you would do auto scaling on the EC2 side. That's your infrastructure auto scaling. But let's say you wanted to auto scale your actual containers or whatever you're running on your platform. So you'd go back to your container service, and if I go to auto scaling, notice how when I actually created this, it was optional. I didn't have to do anything for it. But if I wanted to add auto scaling, I can just click update, change the number of tasks to 2. And if I'm just going to do next step, auto scaling. So I'm going to say configure auto scaling to adjust to your service desired counts. So minimum task, I can do 1 minimum, so to make sure that there's at least 1 of these containers running, and then desired number of tasks. So maybe if I want 2 desired, and then maximum. So I'm going to say, let's say 4. So at this moment, it's going to say, okay, you need 2 containers of whatever application I've deployed with a maximum of 4 if needed. And then you need to add some sort of scaling policy. So you just click on that, give it a name. So I'm going to do ECS scaling BWCE, and I create an alarm for this. So once again, I'm just going to call this ECS scaling BWCE. And once again, it has to be on some sort of ECS metric. So if this is fulfilled within the container itself or within ECS itself, then it will scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do CPU utilization, and I set my alarm. So let's say if the average CPU utilization is greater than 30 for 1 consecutive period of 5 minutes, let's do 3 consecutive periods of 1 minute. So after 3 minutes, if the CPU utilization is greater than 30%, scale. So if I save, and what it's going to do is, that's essentially what the policy I want it to do. And I'm going to say add. So I'm going to say 1 tasks when 30% of the utilization is between whatever value and infinity, and the cooldown period is 300 seconds to make sure that you can set this lower, but I don't want it to be like infinitely scaling, where if it's 30% and then all of a sudden it adds a new one and then it's still higher than 30%, I don't want it to just keep scaling essentially. So just hit save, hit next step, and then you update the service. So what's going to happen is that right now it's going to create your different auto scaling roles. So if I go view service, you'll see that our deployment has auto scaling now, where you set whatever parameters you set, and now if this is fulfilled, then you'll now see some sort of scaling. So right now it's set to 1 task, but with a maximum of 4. But if, let's say, the CPU utilization of that 1 task goes higher than 30%, then scale. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is how you would scale on the container side. And then we showed how to scale on the platform infrastructure side, and then adding logs to that. So it's a couple things that you can add to your ECS cluster and when you're actually building this out on to make your BWC application a little bit more robust. So yeah, in the next video, we're going to move a little bit away from ECS, and we're going to look into just deploying the application or building it out on a single AWS EC2 instance. So we're going to go back to the marketplace, use the CloudFormation script for this single instance, get that up and running, and talk a little bit about that. So hopefully it's helpful for you, and thank you.